I'd like to show you another game with the Kalashnikov Sicilian. So let's see those opening moves. Here we go. Knight c6, d4, open Sicilian. And then e5, challenging white straight away in the centre. Knight b5, d6. That's the start of the variation. I think this game has a beautiful finish and it's really instructive. It was played in an online blitz game by Kevin Glosser, who lives in the States, and he's a viewer of the PowerPlayChess channel. Good man. And he's also an enthusiastic practitioner of the Kalashnikov. And recently he posted this game on Twitter, and I'd like to take a look at it, like to analyse it. I think it's really interesting. So this was a 5-minute game, 5 minutes for all the moves. And white played c4. Well, we saw this in the last video, and there black played this system, going for a very early f5, which is very interesting. But in my course, for my chessable course, I recommended another system, which Kevin plays here. And that is to fianchetto the king's bishop, like this, and play the knight to f6. And I've demonstrated some games already on the channel with this line. I think it's very, very interesting. Now here white decides to play bishop g5 and exchange off that queen's bishop to gain more control over d5. I mean, personally, I think this is a slightly dubious decision because it gives black more potential on the dark squares, as we'll see later on. Bishop g7, correct. Just duck the bishop out of range of the knight, and that bishop has prospects later on in the game. Knight c2, so the knight swings round. It's pretty out of play on a3. Castles. And here white plays knight e3, supporting the knight on d5, but it does allow black's knight into d4. This is one of the big drawbacks when white plays c4, that in many positions it gives black the chance to throw that knight into d4. In the course I call this the Trojan horse. Sometimes black even sacrifices a pawn to open up lines, but here it's well supported by the pawn and the bishop. And, well, let's have a look at what happens if white decides to exchange off that knight. Well, first of all, let's capture here, and then take the bishop on e2. And now h5. Oh, squares have gone a different colour. That's a new version of ChessBase. Oh, pretty funky. Didn't realise they were going to do that. Here we can see that bishop, which doesn't look like much at the moment, it's gone red again, is going to pop out at h6, and it controls the c1 square. And that means that black's rook can come to the open file, and black has good chances to conquer that open file. So that's why I think it's dubious to exchange off the bishop on c1 for the knight. But here, well, white didn't play knight c2. I don't think it's anything special anyway. h3 played, and h5. Excellent move. This is a lovely maneuver. So the bishop comes back, and a room is created for that bishop to potentially pop out onto h6. King h2 by white. Now maybe white is thinking he might want to get in at f4. Who knows? He's taking the king away from this diagonal, but I think f4 is often fraught with danger. But here's a really interesting moment in the game, and black has so many different options here. So I'd like you to have a think. How do you play with black in this position? Black to play. I'll have a quick slurp tea. You have a quick think. Very interesting situation where black has obviously come out of the opening pretty well. Love the knight on d4. 2 bishops, solid setup. But you have to choose a middle game plan. And there are lots of options. I mean, I would consider moves like queen g5 or queen h4. Those look pretty reasonable. I would also look at bishop h6 to improve that bishop. I would also look at b5. That is a typical move playing against the Marozzi bind to loosen white's grip over these squares. And I'd also look at rook c8. I mean, frankly, I'm not sure which I would choose to play first. I like rook c8, I have to say. That feels very logical to me. It also means that I would never have to worry about knight c7 when this queen goes on an adventure. Not that that's a huge problem, actually. I mean, for example, if queen g5 in this position, knight c7 isn't an issue, because recapturing the pawn, this is also a very common theme in this opening, controls d5. So white's knight doesn't have access. And of course that opens the f file as well, which looks really dangerous for white. So in fact it is possible to play that. But I think rook c8 feels nice anyway. And perhaps b5. But yeah, I also like bishop h6. It's a really nice move. If knight c2, then once again we get this kind of situation where black is looking to control the open c file, and e takes d5. Well, this kind of structure is very nice, and then f5. This is a very healthy kingside pawn majority. And if b3, rook c8, and b5, wanting just to exchange here. And if white goes for g3, you can always undermine that with h4, getting control of the dark squares on the king side. So lots of nice options. f5 is also an interesting option. I wonder how many of you considered that move. This was what Kevin played in the game. I have to say, I wouldn't have played it here. I don't think it's a bad move, but when black has lots of other options to improve the position, I would actually hang back with f5 because I think it can give white some counterplay. As I said, I don't think it's bad, but the position becomes very double-edged. When I'm teaching the Kalashnikov and throughout the course and the book, I always say, think very carefully before you play f5, because it kind of raises the stakes, because it can weaken black's king. But let's see what happened, because I think it's very, very interesting. White took. Well, if you don't take, then obviously black could potentially take here, or even push on and go for a huge pawn storm on the king side. So I think white has to take. And here knight f5 was played. Now, instinctively, I want to recapture with the g-pawn. David Bronstein said, every Russian schoolboy knows you should recapture with the knight's pawn in this kind of position. He was talking about the king's Indian, but it's similar setup. And I wouldn't mind giving up the h-pawn because these pawns control some very nice squares. And then rook c8 I think is a really nice follow-up. The idea is that if, let's say f4, then you can exchange here and take on c4. And if pawn takes, then pawn takes pawn and the bishop comes to e5. I think in these kind of positions, black always has very decent compensation. I think it's very interesting. And yeah, I'm not too worried about the king at the moment. Got to watch out for this one, but well, queen g5. Even these endgames, I think black has excellent compensation in the form of the two bishops and that really beautiful centre. But knight takes f5 was played, and yeah, now I'm not so sure about black's position. White took here. but I think bishop d3 is a stronger move. I'm trying to get some control over these light squares. And after, let's say, knight takes here, queen c2, you can see that, you know, white has a bit of pressure. That bishop could come to e4. I feel, well, it's still quite a double-edged position, actually. But with greater control of the light squares, I think it's harder for black to mount an attack on the king side. So I think bishop d3 is the best move here. But instead, knight takes f5 played. And here, with black controlling e4, after e4, then this bishop will fly and it could come to e5, and I think this is interesting for black. You know, I think black is doing pretty well. Now, it's still not so clear, but after g4, whoa, that move is either very good or very bad. You know, when you advance a pawn in front of your king. Let's see what happened. H takes. Now remember, that queen is ready to just leap into the king side. Bishop takes. Now, of course, black doesn't take. That will bring the queen in, but queen h4. And this looks very bad for white now. Rook c8. Always like rook c8. Bit of pressure. And also guards the c7 square. That tactically, that can be very important. So you avoid knight c7 in some positions. e4, excellent. The bishop flies down the diagonal and the e5 square is now available. Rook c1, bishop e5. Beautiful, beautiful square for that bishop. Supported by the d6 pawn. Queen e2. King h8. Very tidy move. Just stepping out of any potential tactics, but also means that the g file is potentially open if, you know, for example, after this exchange, that could be very useful. So a tidy move. Basically, black is in control here, and I like these careful moves actually. Knight e3, rook c7, excellent. That rook prepares to swing across to the f file or indeed the g file, depending on how white plays. I mean, I think ultimately black's attack is going to be too powerful for white. But here, white plays another make or break move. For the second time, white launches a pawn on the king side. Well, if the bishop has to retreat, then perhaps it's possible to play like this. But here, Kevin finds a very nice way to win the game. Pawn takes pawn. En passant, queen takes, and now the winning move. Can you spot it? Bishop e4. Wonderful. Here, white resigned. Let's take a look at what happens if queen takes bishop, check, and mate on h2. A triumph for that dark squared bishop. Indeed, a triumph for the two bishops, full stop. And I think just shows what can happen if white isn't careful when you donate a bishop for a knight. Wonderful final position. Poetry. So well played, Kevin Glosser. Excellent stuff. I really like this final position. And you know, I thought you know, black's strategy very, very instructive. But that, I think, is a really important moment in the game where black has to decide on a middle game plan. And I think f5 is a reasonable move, but there are lots of other ways to play this position as well. Good stuff. If you have played a nice game with the Kalashnikov, do send it to me. I'd be very interested. You know, we can see some really nice games played in this opening. And don't forget, the Chessable course is available. Do check it out, chessable.com. And the book, of course, is available too from newinchess.com as well. Very nice Christmas present. Thanks for watching.